For the second 3D option I want to show you, this is something that I think you'll find a little bit more useful as far as working with type on this. And so I've gone ahead and set the type here again for our illustrious athletic teams here. I'm going to select a different color on this because I think it'll be easier to see the effects on here going forward. So I'm going to start with type in this case, and I'm going to go ahead and outline it. So I'm going to take type, come down here, create outlines, and I'll go ahead and leave this in that color. And now let's go up to effect, and this is going to be the second 3D option I show you. And again, I'm doing these out of order, trying to kind of show you least useful to most useful up here. So for the second one, I'm going to do rotate. And this is going to give me the same dialog box that I had when I did the revolve a little bit. So again, this blue side of the cube represents the type that I put on there, and you can drag it around any direction you want here. Again, the cube's probably going to be the more useful way to do this. You can also use the kind of circular sliders here, or if you have specific coordinates or degrees in here, you can do that. Now, as far as making this look in 3D, it's not really doing that. It's kind of just changing the shape of the type. To get this to appear in 3 dimensions, you really have to add some perspective in it. So as I go ahead and increase that, now you can really see that 3D effect on the type. And again, you have options here. You can add shading or no shading in here. But when you get it how you like it and you hit OK, now you'll notice again as I move this around, you're seeing the ghost of the original type there. This is another one of these options where until you render it, it isn't completely finished, which means you can always go and edit it. So this is another option where if you come up here and do the appearance panel and open that up, again, it will tell you everything that's going on. It's telling me I have a group because all those letters, when I outlined it, those were a group. And here it's giving me that 3D rotate option. So if you decide you want to adjust this, you can always go back and click on this. It will take you back to your original dialog box here. So if you decide maybe you don't want it quite as much, you can do that. Or if you decide you want it from a completely different angle, you can do that as well. And until you render it, you always have the option to go back into the appearance panel and adjust it in here. But when you do get it finished here, then you're going to want to render it. And in Illustrator, the way you render everything is under the Object drop-down menu. Either Expand or Expand Appearance will be available to you on here. And one thing you'll notice on here when you move it around, it's got a rectangular box around everything in here. And just be aware that if you decide you want to change the color, it's going to go for that box. What I usually do is when I'm done rendering everything, what I'll do is just use this white direct selection tool, find that exterior box that's been placed around there, and then if you hit the delete key twice, that will get rid of that box, and now I have my type. And now I can change the color to however I want it. So that's working with the rotate function on here. Now what I'd like to show you is the third one, which is a variation on this. I'm going to go back and hit Command Z and get back to my original type here. All right, so I've got my original type, and again, this is outlined. And it's still grouped together. And this is very, very similar to the last one I did with the rotate, but this is going to be the third 3D effect. And that's called extrude and bevel. And how this is different is this is going to allow me to put a little bit of dimension into my type. So went ahead and did that. This is going to be default on here. And always make sure you have preview checked. Sometimes it won't be checked when you open it up. Now what you can do is, again, you can move this around and you can position it any of the ways we did before. We can add perspective in here. But you have some added options here now that we're working in 3-dimension in here. The first is the actual depth of the type here. You can see it's added a dimension to the letters here. That's referred to as the extrusion. So here in this option, you can choose to make that extrusion really, really extreme, or I can take it down here and make it quite thin. All right. Default is always 50, so you can go ahead and make it less than that, more than that. The cap on here, and I'll show you this, I'm going to zoom in on it here in a minute, but before we get there, you do have the option again of plastic shading with lighting. You can go wireframe on it. You can do no shading, which is going to essentially just give you a big outline shape, or softer lighting in here. And I'm going to go back to plastic shading on here. So like I showed you with the rotate, you can go around here and by grabbing the highlight point on this sphere, you can change the way the lighting is on here. And I'm going to leave this down here. Let's see. Because I want to show you something in here. So I'm playing with the highlight size, the intensity. Let's talk a little bit about blend steps in here. I mentioned this, or I showed you this on one of the previous one. I didn't really explain it. And what it is from a distance, this looks like it's fairly good 3-dimension. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. But I want to zoom in on here, and I'll zoom in on the 0, or not 0, the O in here. So to get the effect that you're getting the curve on the type here, again, Illustrator is a vector program, which means everything is line and points and 2-dimensional shapes. So to get the appearance that I've got this curve on the O, you can see its individual vector points in here. It looks very banded in here, and that's where that option comes up for steps. So let me show you. I'm going to open up the appearance panel again because I want to go back to my 3D extrude on here. And if I up this now on this blend step, you can take it all the way up to 256. Now if you look at that, it's very, very, very smooth. But the reason you get that is if I hit OK, if I go ahead and render this, you'll be able to see it. I'm going to zoom in on here and go into preview mode. To get that very smooth curved look, you're actually dealing with hundreds and hundreds of individual little vectors on here. And I tell you that because what happens is as you start doing this, if you do lots of steps in here, your files are going to get larger and larger. It's not really an issue with one word like this, but if you do start rendering out things that are many more steps in here, it could be a problem. So I'm going to unrender this by going Command Z. I also want to show you one other thing. If I come back here because I have the appearance panel open and I click on that, I'm going to bring the lighting back up here. I wanted to show you this option too. You have the option to put a bevel on the edge of this shape. Let me get a highlight on there so you can see it. So default is no on here, but there's some options on here where you can kind of get a little bit of a beveled edge on here. There's a lot of different options in here. Some of them are really kind of complicated. And you can play around with the different looks on here. The one most people use to here will give it kind of a rounded edge on here. So it kind of looks much more plastic in here. So you do have a lot of options in here, and you can also play with how much of an effect you want on there. So this is the, let me back it up. Now this is showing you one big shortfall with Illustrator on here. And what that is Illustrator as a vector program has a real problem once you get into really acute shapes. So you can see it here on the R. You're going to see it on these really sharp points on the end. And as I was doing this, if you see, if I raise the height on this up, you can see things go south really, really quickly. So just be aware when you're working with all these 3D functions. I'm going to select something a little bit simpler. And let me change the lighting. Hopefully you can see this a little bit better. And if I, yeah, again, you can see once you get into really big sharp shapes like on the R, but that shows you a little bit more of what this bevel looks like on here. This is the classic. It's at 5 points. Maybe I'll lower that down to 3. All right, and you can really see it here on the edges of the type. So you can play around with this once you hit OK. Again, as long as you open this appearance panel, you can say, you know what, it's too brown. I'm going to go back and change the lighting on this. Or maybe I'm going to decide to take that bevel off entirely on there. And once you get this how you like it, you can always go back and render it. But just be aware, again, the minute you render this, there's no going back. I mean, you can always hit Command Z. You can see in appearance I lost that. But especially once you save this, you are pretty much committed to this. So just be aware. Always save that rendering, that expand, the expand option. Make sure you're completely happy with your type before you do that.